I will oppose President Obama's effort to unilaterally fix a broken immigration system by granting amnesty to 5 million illegal immigrants. This is wrong, it's irresponsible, and will do damage to our efforts to fix a broken immigration system. This is a tremendous presidential overreach. I will try to defund the effort for him to go it alone. We will challenge him in court. Now, I will continue to work to repair a broken immigration system in a bipartisan fashion. What the president has chosen to do has done great damage to our nation.
Good morning and welcome to AM Joy. Well, Lindsey Graham, that was him back in 2014. He all but lit his hair on fire after President Obama implemented the DACA program through executive action. But once Donald Trump ended his rambling, nearly hour-long speech on Friday, Senator Graham wasted no time going on Twitter to pledge his absolute devotion, fealty, and fidelity to his president, his captain, praising Trump's use of executive power to swipe taxpayer dollars without congressional authorization to build that wall that Mexico was supposed to pay for. Apparently, it didn't matter that the president once again thwarted the Constitution in order to render Congress powerless, vowing to ignore the law that Graham and a supermajority of senators and House members just passed and that Trump had just signed, or that the president undercut his own rationale for declaring a national emergency by becoming his own worst witness when this declaration inevitably goes to court.
I could do the wall over a longer period of time. I didn't need to do this. But I'd rather do it much faster. And I don't have to do it for the election. I've already done a lot of wall for the election, 2020. And the only reason we're up here talking about this is because of the election. Because they want to try and win an election, which it looks like they're not going to be able to do. And this is one of the ways they think they can possibly win, is by obstruction and a lot of other nonsense. And I think that I just want to get it done faster. That's all.
With House Democrats poised to use every measure at their disposal to try and block Trump's latest stunt, and the legal challenge is already mounting, let's take a look at where things go from here. Joining me now is House Majority Whip, Congressman James Clyburn of South Carolina. Congressman, how are you? Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. So let's talk about what Congress can do about this. But I want to, before that, you've been around Congress for a while. Have you ever heard of a president declaring a national emergency in order to thwart obstruction in Congress?
Absolutely not. Don, it is amazing to me that this president, by his own words, admit that we do not have an emergency. What we've got here is a disagreement between the Congress and the executive branch of the government over exactly how to pay for border security. Now, the president promised us throughout the campaign that he was going to build this big, beautiful wall, and Mexico would be paying for it. That's the promise he made. That's what people voted for. Now he's saying the Congress should pay for it. That's never been in the discussion by the president or anybody else running for Congress. Nobody running for Congress ran on paying for a big, beautiful 30-foot wall. So the president does not have an emergency. He has manufactured this crisis, and now he's attempting to get the Congress to agree with him to pay for something that he himself created and admitted on yesterday that he did not have to do it, and quite frankly, he should not have done it.
And the bill that was signed into law by the president not long before he declared this national emergency, anywhere in that bill, does it authorize the president of the United States to take money out of the Defense Department or any other agency to build a wall?
Absolutely not. Congress has the power of the purse. We have told the president and everybody else how money should be spent. And much of this money that the president is talking about repurposing, money paid for the defense of this country, paid to do what the president said he's trying to do with building a wall. So he's taking the money away from the defense of the country, much of it in military construction, to pay for some medieval wall, which he knows will be ineffective, and he knows has never been authorized and should not be authorized.
And sir, what will Congress do now as Majority Whip? You're in the leadership team that's going to make a decision on what happens now. What does the House of Representatives do from here?
Well, I would hope the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, will put forward a resolution of disapproval. That we can do. I really believe the votes are there in order to pass the resolution of disapproval. And as I understand the legislation, the Senate then will have to act on this resolution within 18 days of our having passed it. And hopefully the Senate will agree. Now, I don't hold out any hope that they will. And I certainly know that if they were to agree with us, the president would probably veto it. I don't know why the legislation was written that way. If it's called upon us to disapprove of what the president may say, why then when we go back, then the president get a second bite out of the apple, so to speak. But that's the way the legislation is written, and we'll see what happens at that point.
Very quickly before we go, sir, we don't have a lot of time, but is there a possibility that the House of Representatives might sue the president as the Republicans attempted to sue President Obama when they didn't like, I believe it was over the Affordable Care Act or DACA?
That's a great possibility. I think Speaker Pelosi has spoken to that. But the fact of the matter is, by the time we get back up there in another week and get a suit done, we will be about 15th in line. Because I think there must be 4 or 5 suits already.
Wow. Okay, Congressman Jim Clyburn, House Majority Whip, thank you very much, sir. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's now bring in our panel. Paul Butler, MSNBC legal analyst. Nayyera, former White House senior director. Karine Jean-Pierre, senior advisor from MoveOn.org. Rick Stengel, former Undersecretary of State in the Obama administration and former head of the National Constitution Center. Elie Mystal, editor at AboveTheLaw.com. And Rick Wilson, Republican media strategist and author of Everything Trump Touches Dies, a quite subtle title. I want to start with you, Paul. The National Emergencies Act of 1976 stipulates that when a president declares a national emergency, he has the complete discretion to issue it, that the president is required to notify Congress and specify which power he intends to use. Congress can then block it with a resolution of disapproval, which we just discussed with the congressman. The president has to report to Congress on emergency-related expenditures every 6 months, and the president must issue public updates if he decides to invoke additional powers. The previous national emergencies that are still in effect, because they can be in effect as long as Congress doesn't stop them, were for the Iranian hostage crisis in 1979, the 9/11 terror attacks of 2001, violence and atrocities in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the spread of nuclear weapons in North Korea. This is not that.
This is illegal. It's unconstitutional. The congressman is right. There's going to be a long line of people waiting to sue Donald Trump. This is like a jobs program for constitutional lawyers. There's so many legal issues. And all it does is really move the delay from Congress to the courts, because it's going to take a long time for all of these issues to be resolved, including what is the emergency?
Right.
Emergency sounds like national crisis, immediate crisis. That doesn't exist. When Trump was confronted with those facts yesterday, he ignored them. He was told most drugs come in through people who are entering the country legally. He said, I don't believe it. He was told that native-born Americans actually commit more crimes than immigrants. He said that's not true. It is true. So the concern is we have a president who is willfully ignorant about facts, who already was the most powerful person in the world, but when he declares this national emergency, he unleashes these superpowers.
And can, Elie, if you could explain to us, how would a lawsuit play out? We've heard now that various organizations are talking about potentially suing the president over this. There could be the ACLU lawsuit. You just heard Congressman Clyburn say that it's possible for Congress to play out. Who has standing to sue over this?
Lots of people. It's going to play out pretty much like the president said it was going to play out. He will be sued, and he will lose. Then it will be appealed, and he will lose again. And then it will go to the Supreme Court. And that's where, Professor Butler, I think, said it right. But in terms of the president being willfully ignorant, but the problem is that we also have a Supreme Court stacked with Trump judges that might well be willfully ignorant of the president. We saw this all happen with the Muslim ban. And the key problem with the conservatives on the Supreme Court when it came to the Muslim ban is that they refused to acknowledge the evidence that the president was acting in bad faith. I know liberals want to look at that press conference, that disaster in the Rose Garden, and say that, oh, Trump admitted that there's no emergency. That's true, but the Supreme Court now has a documented history of ignoring the fact that the president is lying and acting in bad faith and acting on his directives anyway. I do think that Protect Democracy are the people who are already suing. They're representing El Paso. The California Attorney General, they're going to have standing. They're going to sue very quickly. There is a very, very, very good separations of powers argument. The president cannot declare a national emergency because Nancy Pelosi gave him a wedgie. That said, there are 5 conservative justices, and we don't know if they have the strength to stand up to the president because they haven't in the past.
Yeah, we didn't need that visual, Elie, and so to punish you, I'm going to play Donald Trump saying what you said, but he said it in song and verse.
So the order is signed, and I'll sign the final papers as soon as I get into the Oval Office, and we will have a national emergency, and we will then be sued, and they will sue us in the Ninth Circuit, even though it shouldn't be there, and we will possibly get a bad ruling, and then we'll get another bad ruling, and then we'll end up in the Supreme Court, and hopefully we'll get a fair shake, and we'll win in the Supreme Court, just like the ban.
Just like the ban. The ban is the problem here. Every argument that everybody's going to make for why this is illegal, we all made for the ban, and the ban should have been illegal, and the Supreme Court ignored it and authorized it. And so, you know, when you're talking to Congressman Clyburn, Congress cannot just assume that the courts are going to bail them out. If there are any Republican senators who do not want president who won the popular vote to declare a national emergency, go down to Mar-a-Lago, raise it, turn it into a sandbar to protect against the rising seas. If any Republican doesn't want that future, they need to vote against this national emergency and terminate it.
All right, let me go to Rick Wilson on this, because this is the problem, Rick. Lawrence Tribe made the points that Paul and Elie has made. I mean, it's very clear. Lawrence Tribe tweeted from the Constitution. Imagine that. Article 1, Section 9. Remember, the Article 1 power is Congress. No money shall be drawn from the Treasury, but in consequence of appropriations made by law. And then he asked, what part of no money do you not understand, Mr. Trump? Mike Lee, who is from the wing we normally think of as being sort of self-described constitutional conservatives, came out and he said his initial assessment is that what Trump announced is legal. Whether or not it should be legal is a different matter. Congress has been ceding far too much power to the executive branch for decades. We should use this moment as an opportunity to start taking that power back. There's a lot of cynicism, Rick, about whether or not even he's going to mean that. When a bill is put on the floor, a resolution of disapproval, the thinking of a lot of people is that people like Mike Lee are going to hem and haw, and then they're not going to vote for that resolution.
That's right, Joy. And I think what we're going to see is the usual act that we see with the Republican caucus every time. There are furrowed brows, there's hand-wringing, there's, they run to their fainting couches because it's so shocking and appalling, and they tell reporters off the record, I can't believe this guy did this outrageous, egregious thing. And then they will go on the floor out of a fear of a primary in 2020 and say, Mr. President, I believe he's doing this for the right reasons and the right thing. It is an unbelievable abdication of their responsibilities. And it's one more sign that my party has devolved into media bashing and Trump worshiping, and there's nothing else there. Everything we used to care about, the Constitution, the deficit, the debt, security, alliances, the world, stability, moral probity, all of it's gone except for what makes Donald happy.
And, Rick Stengel, the other thing that appears to be gone is any concern that the Defense Department's the money appropriated to the Defense Department was given to them for a good reason, right? I mean, we've been accustomed to hearing liberals say there should be cuts to the Department of Defense and conservatives saying, no, you absolutely cannot, and then having agreements between Democrats and Republicans that the Pentagon should just keep getting more money. Well, in this case, Donald Trump is planning to take money away from the military in order to do something Mexico was supposed to pay for. He has got $1.375 billion from the appropriations bill, none of which was authorized to be for a wall. It's very explicit. I just asked the congressman this. He's going to try and take $3.6 billion under emergency powers from military construction, another $2.5 billion from the Defense Department's drug interdiction program, which seems counterfactual if the goal is to decrease drug smuggling on the southern border. And then he's going to swipe $600 million from the Treasury Department's drug forfeiture fund. Are we to now believe that, at least in the current iteration of the Republican Party and the Republican White House, Defense Department money is fungible? It doesn't matter that whatever those, that money was intended for is not important. He's just going to use it to build a wall and put his name on it.
Well, Joy, it's another usurpation of Congress's power, because Congress designated that money for the Defense Department. They said that it's important. He, in a kind of an offhanded remark, said it doesn't seem that important to me. But I want to go back to the primary culprit here, and I'm so glad you actually, at the beginning of the show, flashed something from the National Emergencies Act of 1976. That's the problem. It's a poorly worded, overly broad law that basically says the President of the United States defines what a national emergency is, and he defines it simply by declaring a national emergency. That's the problem. Congress needs to remedy that. I am not confident that the courts would overturn any of his actions, because the courts have a history of confirming what the legislators have done. They will look at the law, and the law says, look, the president can do this. This law was passed in the post-Watergate era, in fact, ironically enough, to give Congress more oversight about presidents declaring emergencies act. But Congress has abdicated that responsibility. There have been 59 of these national emergencies declared since the law. 31 are still extant, and Congress has never even had a hearing or overturned one of them. So I think the remedy for this, frankly, is not the courts that will just go along with what the law says. The remedy is Congress, and there, as a lot of the folks have said, I'm not that hopeful either.
Yeah, that's the problem. Let me come to the table here. Karine, if Congress is, Congress is the most powerful entity as written in the United States Constitution. Yeah. But at this point, one half of the Congress, it was both halves, are essentially acting as agents of the president. They're acting as employees, basically. So the courts are now being stacked with agents of the president.
Yeah.
What now?
We are in trying times, for sure, Joy. So I think what now is we're going to see two things. We're going to see it's a divided government. So you have Nancy Pelosi, who has a gavel, who is the Speaker of the House. And I think what she's going to do is she'll put forth a resolution. She will force Republicans to go on record, not just in the House, but in the Senate, because it's a resolution and because of it's a national emergency and what it means, it'll just automatically, like, she can't stop. Mitch McConnell can't stop not putting it. He has to put it on the floor. So he's had to make those 22 Republicans who are up for election in 2020 are going to have to vote on this. Right. And so that's going to be key, I think, really key. And you have some purple state Republicans who are worried about what's going on with this national emergency and what this president is doing. And then there's another part of this, too. It is the people, right? Move On is going to be hosting thousands of people have signed up in the last 12 hours, and there are more than 100 events coast to coast across the country that's going to happen on Monday, and people have to take to the streets. We can't allow this to happen. And you know who's a national emergency? It is Donald Trump who's the national emergency. There is no national emergency. He wants this bigoted wall that majority of people do not want, and he's trying to placate to, a third of his base, and that's all he's doing. And also the right-wing media, who he's afraid of, who have bullied him into, first of all, shutting down the government for 35 days. And now we're in this situation with a national emergency. So it's going to be up to the House, who's going to have to put them all on a record, them being the Republicans, and we have to take to the streets.
Yeah, and I think you make a point, because also Monday is President's Day, which is interesting in the sense that Donald Trump, and this is a pretty long soundbite, but I want to play it because I want to come to Nayyera on the question of what is a president at this point? What does it mean to be president, right? It appears that this is an original thought, Donald Trump is doing a television show. And the television show is for an audience of about two people, Sean Hannity and Ann Coulter. And that he feels that as long as they enjoy the show, he's being president. But you can't make policy and take actual real tax money and put it toward a television show, because building a wall, it isn't even possible. It would never happen in the lifetime of his presidency, even if he had 2 terms. Just the eminent domain lawsuits would take years. But I want to play an aspect of Donald Trump doing this show that also has a lot of seeds of echoes of authoritarianism, in just the way that he refuses to accept information and the way he treats this particular reporter. This is a reporter named Brian Karam. I'd book him on the show, but he's attached to CNN because he was really good. I mean, I thought his questioning was spot on. Yeah. But here he is attempting to get Donald Trump to accept reality.
I'm asking you to clarify where you get your numbers, because most of the DEA crimes reporting statistics that we see show that drugs are coming across at the ports of entry, that illegal immigration is down, and the violence is down. Okay. So what do you base your facts on?
Come on, let's go.
Secondly...
no, you get one. You get one.
Well, the second
just
question
is... Wait, sit down. Sit down.
Could you please answer?
Sit down. You get one question. I get my numbers from a lot of sources, like Homeland Security, primarily. And the numbers that I have from Homeland Security are a disaster. And you know what else is a disaster? The numbers that come out of Homeland Security, Kirsten, for the cost that we spend and the money that we lose because of illegal immigration. Billions and billions of dollars a month. Billions and billions of dollars. And it's unnecessary.
So your own government stats are wrong, are you saying?
No, I use many stats.
Could you share those stats with us?
Let me tell you, you have stats that are far worse than the ones that I use. But I use many stats, but I also use Homeland Security. All right, next question.
Okay, first of all, kudos to that reporter for not sitting down. He does not have to sit down. The President of the United States is the employee of 326 million people. He's not our boss. Donald Trump seems to think he's our boss, and that he's and he can tell a reporter, sit down and shut up. You know you can't.
Well, it's just, as you mentioned, the broader authoritarian attitude that he has, in complete denial of how our democracy is supposed to work, right? He is unable to negotiate with Congress, which is a co-equal branch. They are Article 1. Their powers came first. They're the ones who actually decide how taxpayer money gets spent, not the President of the United States and any administration. And he completely denies the authority of the Fourth Estate, which is the media, and their necessary function of being a transparent check on behalf of the American public. This is him aping the dictators that we see and authoritarians we see overseas. This is why he loves Kim Jong-un. This is why he loves Putin, who has these similar tactics of how he treats media and treats fact checkers and really anybody who questions his authority, or Duterte in the Philippines. The numbers of examples overseas are endless, and this is the challenge that we now have in national security, of having Donald Trump represent the United States at places like the Munich Security Conference. He sent Vice President Pence there to effectively wage a domestic speech to the international audience about how North Korea and Iran are the biggest threats to the world, not bringing up his own national emergency that he just declared, that is a border crisis that apparently requires raiding the Department of Defense budget. You would think he would talk about that overseas if that was the true national security threat that we were facing. And luckily, we've had the biggest congressional delegation ever go to the same conference to reassure our allies that the United States is still working to fight for these values overseas of freedom of press, freedom of religion, of maintaining alliances. And that is now what Congress is stepping up to do. So thank God that we have at least some members of Congress that are willing to exercise their authority and who will now be held accountable as this resolution moves forward.
Paul, do the military contractors who that money was intended to go to in order to do construction projects that I assume at some point were thought to be very important,
yes,
do they have standing to sue?
Probably. So a court will decide. So Congress will have standing possibly to make legal claims. People whose homes are taken by the government, taken over private property, so there'll be a lot of suits there. And yeah, we can talk about lawsuits from military contractors, but I want to talk about lobbying those Republicans who know that this is illegal and unconstitutional, because this is billions of dollars that those military contractors are counting on spending for actual military projects. This is not a military project.
Yeah.
Congress, as we know, has the power to appropriate money. Congress has said these billions should go to our armed services. services. When President Trump removes that to build a wall, he's got to have a legal explanation. He's got to point to a specific law that authorizes this. That law does not exist. So again, both legal challenges, but more importantly, political challenges, because if Congress wants to, they can shut this down.
Yeah. And Rick Stengel, there's a Native American tribe in Arizona that's already indicated that they're not going down without a fight. They're not going to allow their land to be taken. I mean, all that's been done to the Native tribes, the idea that the government would go in and try to seize their land to put a wall on it. You've seen in Nogales, Arizona, they're stringing up concertina wire on the American side so that they have to look at this hideous prison-like wall on their side for no reason. And then the takings clause. We're about to get an education in what it looks like when eminent domain is visited upon private ranchers in Arizona. Is that where we're headed?
Yes, I mean, the indignity to Native Americans just obviously continues. And in the case of eminent domain, I do think the suits around those particular geographical areas where the president is using eminent domain frivolously might actually be more successful, even though I do agree that the ultimate remedy for this is Congress. I mean, the primary culprit is the national securities law. It needs to either be amended, it needs to be changed. Congress needs to take action. And I agree with Karine that people need to get out there and protest this kind of thing. I mean, not only the Fourth Estate, but the Fifth Estate of people out there saying, look, these things are not going to be tolerated even if they abide by law.
Yeah, I fear that if the fate of this thing is in the hands of Lindsey Graham and Susan Collins and company, I'm not sure that that's very hopeful for a lot of people. Paul, Karine, Elie, and Rick. We'll be back later in the show. Nayyera, Rick Stengel, thank you very much. And coming up,